Consider the story in the Gospels of Jesus' Transfiguration. It is more appropriately described by the technical term theophany, meaning when God appears to an individual person. Throughout the Bible, we find a number of theophanies, the most notable being those experienced by Moses. And Elijah. Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 10. Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up to a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them, along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them. From the cloud came a voice, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. The theophany of God to Jesus, reported by the anonymous author we call Mark, includes 4 elements that are common to all these accounts. 1. The mountain. The setting for a biblical theophany is customarily a mountain. 2. The witnesses. Frequently there are eyewitnesses to the event, though they may not see and hear exactly the same things experienced by the one to whom God is appearing. 3. The signs. The witnesses or the accounts report visible signs that the event is occurring. Jesus was transfigured before them, his garments glistening, intensely white. A cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. 4. Shared experience. The witnesses sometimes share in the experience. Peter, James, and John see Moses and Elijah conversing with Jesus. Did the followers of Jesus hear the contents of the conversation between Jesus, Moses, and Elijah? Or did they only hear the voice from Sky Vault, commanding them to listen to Jesus, the Son? This is left unclear. After the experience, Jesus forbids his 3 followers to tell what they had seen, but says nothing about what they had heard. Only the anonymous evangelist we call Matthew calls the event a vision. Generally speaking, critical scholars agree about the function of this transfiguration experience. God commissions the recipient of the theophany to some new role and status. Baptism of Jesus was a theophany in which Jesus was authorized by God to preach and perform mighty deeds. At the midpoint in the gospel called Mark, the Transfiguration is a theophany that authorizes Jesus to make his way to Jerusalem to meet his destiny, the cross, and his vindication. Clearly, theophanies involve revelation, divine disclosure. While scholars generally agree about the function of theophanies, there is much less agreement concerning the nature of these experiences. Some have interpreted the Transfiguration as a resurrection appearance, retrojected back into Jesus' life before the crucifixion. But this opinion is not well supported, and generally speaking, is rejected. Recent commentators interpret the Transfiguration as a prophecy of Jesus' parousia, that is, something like a prelude or foreshadowing of Jesus' future coming in glory as judge. Thinking this way, we might then call the Transfiguration a preview of coming attractions, like a movie trailer. Still other scholars call the Transfiguration eschatological, without explaining in plain English exactly what that means. But you know what? Following culturally informed scholars like Dr. John Pilch, there is a much simpler explanation for the event we call the Transfiguration. The technical description is an experience of alternate reality, or an altered state of consciousness. Anthropologists note that such experiences are universal human phenomena, experienced in a wide variety of forms by all human beings. 90% of 488 societies from all parts of the world studied by scientists routinely have this kind of experience. Anthropologist Erica Berkwa-Young concludes that societies which do not utilize these states clearly are historical exceptions to be explained, rather than the vast majority of societies that do use these states. Most current studies attempting to understand the Jesus of history generally take little cognizance of the fact that he became incarnate in the ancient Mediterranean world. Anthropologists who specialize in this region and its literary records point out that approximately 90% of world cultures and 80% of circum-Mediterranean cultures readily experience altered states of consciousness. From the biblical record alone, which is included in the Anthropological Databank, it is evident that the people of this ancient culture were certainly among that 80%. Studies of Moroccan Jews in Israel are particularly enlightening in this regard. When they were forcibly repatriated to Israel in the 1950s and 1960s, the Moroccan Jews carried with them not only their personal belongings, but their beliefs, values, and traditions. They revitalized their practices and attached them to new sites and new saints to substitute for those they left behind. One of these takes place at the tomb of Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai at Meren Nir-Zafed. On the anniversary of his death, these devotees make a pilgrimage to his tomb, celebrate a picnic-like feast in the surrounding countryside, and expect to see him in a dream. And they do. The dream pattern typically has 4 elements, common in altered state of consciousness experiences, or ASC experiences for short. 1. Those experiencing the vision are initially frightened. And 2. Do not recognize the figure appearing before them. 3. The figure appearing before them offers calming assurance. Do not be afraid. And 4. Identifies herself or himself. It is I. Then the figure offers information. Maybe it's clarification of identity or the granting of a favor, for example, healing or a healing strategy. The purpose of the experience is to illuminate a puzzle in life or to suggest or approve a line of conduct. Notice that this is not a literary form. It is a pattern of human experience constructed by the culture rather than by someone's creative imagination. Jesus and those who knew him were quite familiar with and adept at experiences of alternate reality. Accounts of Jesus' baptism, transfiguration, walking on the Sea of Galilee, and post-death or post-resurrection appearances readily fit into the common Mediterranean cultural experiences of altered states of consciousness, even when the experience that is reported is so in an incomplete or selective manner. Aside from dreams and angelic appearances featured prominently in the infancy narratives of Matthew and Luke, the synoptics report 5 main incidents of such visions and/or appearances in the career of Jesus. The dunking of Jesus, also called his baptism, an experience in altered reality. The testing of Jesus, also called the temptation of Jesus, an experience in altered states of consciousness. Of course, walking on the sea stories, which we have been dealing with at some length in these presentations, another ASC experience. The Transfiguration accounts of Jesus, another example of Jesus in altered reality. And of course, the resurrection appearances, also ASC experiences that we will deal with soon. Throughout his gospel, the anonymous author known as Matthew is intent upon presenting Jesus as a Moses-like figure. In his account of the Transfiguration, Jesus' face shines like Moses' did. And in the Transfiguration account, Moses is named before Elijah. Biblical scholars agree that it is impossible to say exactly what really happened in this event in Jesus' ministry. Mediterranean culture, however, offers us some helpful insights. Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. Jesus took Peter, James, and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And look, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, look, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise, and do not be afraid." And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, "Do not tell the vision to anyone until the skyvald man has been raised from the dead." Let's explore the cultural background of this story. Honor is the main Mediterranean cultural value, and it's on display in this account of the Transfiguration, big time. Jesus demonstrated power over demons, and that gave him a solid claim to honor in his culture. This ability stood in contrast to his known origins. Remember in the Gospel of John, Nathanael's sarcastic question to Philip, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" In other words, Nazareth was seen as a nothing place of nothing people. Consider power and shame. Jesus' power over demons also placed him in jeopardy. No one, not even his enemies, ever denied the reality of this power. But many Israelite leaders wondered about the source of Jesus' authority. Where do you get this authority? Who gave you this authority? Some concluded that Jesus was in cahoots with the devil. If Jesus does not possess legitimate power and authority, then he is arrogating to himself something to which he has no right. That would be very shameful. To complicate matters, power belongs to the realm of politics. In the Gospels, Jesus' healings and exorcisms are viewed by all, friend and foe alike, as political activities. This is the concern behind the puzzlement in Matthew chapter 21, verse 23. Folks, unapproved political activities could lead to an Israelite's death. Jesus was not unaware of these potential consequences of his ministry. The Matthean Jesus says to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. Fully accepting the risk of his ministry, Jesus was also convinced that God would grant him ultimate honorable vindication. He would be raised by God. What an honor that is! Now consider the Transfiguration and how it's described in the Gospel called Matthew. Only this anonymous author we remember as Matthew refers to this experience as a vision. But you know, this is a most important piece of information. Modern psychological anthropology points out that alternative states of consciousness, like visions and dreams, are normal, pan-human experiences common to the majority of the world's cultures. But cultures in which these are not so common, except by way of dreaming while you're asleep, or under the influence of a substance, these would be cultures like our contemporary United States culture, the Baltic cultures. These are the anomalous cultures that have to be explained. They're not the normative ones. In Matthew's version of the Transfiguration, Jesus is obviously experiencing an alternate state of consciousness. Peter, James, and John are participants in this experience, during which they gain a clearer understanding of Jesus as one who lived on the brink of shame all the time, but still maintained a position of favor with the patron God of Israel. In all cultures, altered states of consciousness are normal means of learning otherwise impossible to gain new information. These three chosen disciples realized that, contrary to occasional appearances and impressions, Jesus was an honorable person whose activities were pleasing to God. Jesus' firm conviction that God would restore his honor by raising him from the dead was not a simple whistling in the dark. Instead, it was rooted in God's steadfast loving kindness, experienced in alternate reality. In Matthew's lifetime, many actual and potential Mediterranean believers in Jesus were troubled by his shameful death. If this man's life and ministry were pleasing to the God of Israel, why did it seem that God had abandoned him? The anonymous author, remembered as Matthew, portrays Jesus as another Moses, and this shows that God no more abandoned Jesus than he had abandoned Moses. Matthew exhorts his Jesus group to stand under the lordship of the risen Lord Jesus, who is a second Moses and lawgiver to his Jesus group. Jesus will come at the end to judge the Jesus group according to the new or better righteousness that he taught, just like Moses did on a mountain. What does the Transfiguration story say to us contemporary Western believers? In his honor-shame culture, Jesus maintained steadfast loyalty and trust in God, no matter how shameful his life experiences appeared. To a large degree, Jesus had no other choice in his culture. But his loyalty, that is, his biblical faith, paid off. God restored honor to him in a way that no human ever could have. My friends, our culture in the West is very different. For us, individualistic self-reliance is highly valued. It is equally challenging to trust in God, especially when we feel we are fully in control of our lives and destinies. Would that the behavior of all believers in every culture would merit divine approval, that God would say of each of us, "This is my beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Hey, listen to what this person says." In her recent study of the Transfiguration of Jesus, Chicago biblical scholar and Dominican sister Barbara Reed concluded that Luke's account, which happens to be this Sunday's gospel, probably contains the earliest form of the story. Luke chapter 9, verses 28b through 36. Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up the mountain to pray. While he was praying, his face changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzling white. And look, two men were conversing with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. Peter and his companions had been overcome by sleep, but becoming fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As they were about to part from him, Peter said to Jesus,
"Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But he did not know what he was saying. While he was still speaking, a cloud came and cast a shadow over them, and they became frightened when they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my chosen son. Listen to him." After the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. They fell silent and did not at that time tell anyone what they had seen. 2 men appeared in glory and spoke of Jesus' exodus, which he was to fulfill in Jerusalem. Peter and those with him saw Jesus' glory and the 2 men standing with him. In the earliest version of this story, perhaps the 2 men were most likely 2 angels, presenting an instructive message about forthcoming events for earthbound listeners. Influenced by Mark, the Lucan redactor equated these angels with Moses and Elijah, and added other information from Mark. Like many historical critical biblical scholars, Sister Reed considers the evidence of this text as too fragmentary to provide scientifically certain results about what that experience really might have been. Such skepticism, however, is unwarranted. It is based upon the unexamined and unquestioned Western cultural biases that so permeate science as to be almost indistinguishable from it. Scientific cultural analyses of 488 societies from all the world's cultures have discovered that 90% of these societies routinely and normally experience alternate realities in waking visions or trances. The phrase that describes such a human experience is altered state of consciousness. Even scientifically minded Americans are familiar with some of these experiences. A favorite piece of music, a cherished painting, or even a glass of wine can produce changes in consciousness. Generally speaking, however, Americans distrust whatever they cannot control. Experiences of alternate reality are spontaneous. One allows them to happen. But since the development of science in the 17th century, Westerners have successfully blocked access to these experiences and tend to distrust or discredit those who have them. In the ancient Mediterranean world, experiences of alternate reality in vision and trance were common. Devotees of the healing god Asclepius routinely learned about their illness and appropriate therapy for it from this god in a sacred dream. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel describe their experiences of God in alternate reality. The entire book of Revelation is a report of what the author, John, experienced in an altered state of consciousness that could be called an ecstasy or a trance. The literal Greek is in spirit in Revelation. In Luke's Gospel, the baptism of Jesus could be viewed as an experience of alternate reality, in which one could see the sky vaults opened and the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove, and hear a voice speaking intelligibly. The Lucan temptation story, created as it is by tradition, can also be interpreted as an experience of alternate reality in an altered state of consciousness. The Transfiguration story makes good, culturally plausible sense as another such experience. It is similar to an ancient report by a translator of a book of healings by Asclepius. He took ill and went with his mother to the temple for healing. In a waking vision, she saw the god Asclepius come to him, and when she woke him to relate what she saw, before she could say anything, he informed her that he saw the same in his own dream. Jesus and his select circle of disciples share an experience of alternate reality. The text does not tell us what Jesus saw or heard, only that his face gave external indication of his experience. The text reports what Peter, James, and John saw and heard. The scene concludes with an assurance from Skyvault. This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. A common function of experiences of alternate reality is to provide enlightenment about some puzzle, or guidance regarding a proper course of action to take. In Luke's storyline, Jesus' teaching and healing activities gain for him friends, but they also gain for him enemies. His fellow villagers and others wanted to kill him. It would take an experience like the Transfiguration to set the minds of Jesus and his chosen followers at ease. In spite of many ominous signs, the God of Israel was pleased with Jesus and encouraged the trio of Peter, James, and John to heed what Jesus says. Even if a biblical scholar insisted in denying that this is really what happened in history, the scenario makes very plausible Mediterranean sense. One can only admire an evangelist who created the scene if it did not happen in actual fact. My friends, the Western infatuation with science has brought in its wake blessings and curses. No one can deny the many benefits that science produces. The challenge is not to lose precious human gifts, like the capacity for mystical experiences and other experiences of alternate reality that hold an honored place in Christian tradition and piety.
The great Carl Jung notes that all human beings are bad observers of things that are unfamiliar to them. 21st century Western people are extremely unfamiliar with the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cultural world from which our scriptures and Jesus come. No one possesses immaculate perception, but many are infected by immaculate perception disease, the condition which makes people think they do. And when it comes to immaculate perception disease, my friends, we have a pandemic going. Every one of us, including the scholars and researchers, got baggage. And we inevitably start exploring things, like the Bible, from a personal perspective within our own culture, within our own personal history, within our own agendas, etc. Is there really any other way to begin? And that's true whenever we pick up a Bible. That is why comparative studies, such as psychological anthropology and other anthropological disciplines, are so pertinent to biblical study. The vast majority of biblical scholars, not to mention preachers and homilists, popular authors, popular speakers, and even mystics in our time, all of us are outsiders to the culture we are investigating whenever we deal with Scripture. And if we do not use a comparative approach, we run the risk of interpreting ancient Mediterranean texts talking about spirits and demons, like in the passage of the temptation of Jesus, or experiences like the Transfiguration, anachronistically and ethnocentrically. Psychologically minded Western interpreters are ever eager to analyze ancient Middle Eastern persons, like Jesus, with tools developed in our Western culture. It's so easy to ethnocentrically conclude that demons in the gospel narratives were just clever symbols used to express addictive behavior of ancient people, or other psychological problems and mental illness. You see the psychological spin there? It's very easy for Western interpreters to look at a story like the Transfiguration and reduce it to just Jesus having an aha moment or a eureka moment. That the shine and the light is not really shine and light, but just Jesus having a realization. It's so easy for Western commenters to reduce the Transfiguration experience to a realization moment, the glow of being awake to something. But is that really what these stories are talking about? Since psychology and psychiatry from their beginnings have focused on individuals in industrial urban societies and have developed in that context, they are inescapably Western, ethnocentric to us, and incomplete sciences rooted in Freud and Freudian, and Jung and Jungian matrices. They wonderfully apply to us, but not Jesus and his peers. Cultural anthropology and various subdisciplines like cross-cultural psychology, featured on this Bible Alive YouTube channel, provide a healthy and respectful understanding of the concepts needed in investigating biblical concepts like spirits and demons, and the Transfiguration, and walking on the sea, and Jesus' healings. We must rely upon cross-cultural psychology because psychology and psychiatry are monocultural disciplines, too inextricably embedded into Western culture to be of significant use in analyzing the Mediterranean library we call the Bible.